Iran. Hello everyone, I'm Christiane Amanpour and welcome to our program. This week we focus on two presidents who are cracking down on opposition protesters at home and ignoring President Obama's policy of engagement.
¡Viva Bolívar! ¡Viva José Félix Rivas! ¡Viva el socialismo! ¡Viva el padre de la patria!
Venezuela faces a severe energy crisis, and that is President Hugo Chavez rallying against a political storm. We'll talk to Venezuela's ambassador to the United States, an opposition leader in Caracas, and an expert on the region. Plus, remember this?
My administration is now committed to diplomacy that addresses the full range of issues before us and to pursuing constructive ties among the United States, Iran, and the international community.
But Obama's early efforts at engagement with Iran have been derailed by a defiant president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and a disputed election. And there's news now that Iran may have a secret program to develop a nuclear warhead for a missile. That is according to the head of the IAEA, the UN nuclear watchdog, in a draft report obtained by CNN on Thursday. But earlier, we had a US exclusive with Iran's top human rights official.
Iran is the greatest, and not only the greatest, the only democracy in the Middle East.
We'll be speaking to Mohammad Javad Larijani later in the program, but we begin with Venezuela. Oil production is sinking there and inflation is soaring. So too is the crime rate. Chavez, though, remains a Bolivarian hero to many, rejecting opposition calls to loosen his grip. Venezuela's ambassador to the United States put forth Chavez's case. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us on this program.
Thank you for having us.
You just heard that report from Caracas talking about the unprecedented economic crisis in your country right now and the plummeting levels of satisfaction, should we say. What is President Chavez going to do to redress this problem? For instance, the soaring crime, the insecurity that is affecting many people there right now.
Well, first, you know, when you see the situation in Venezuela this day, it's far from being the worst situation in the last decade of Venezuela. If you talk about economic growth, if you talk about social inequality, if you talk about inflation, employment, etc., the situation is not what has been presented. But just to give you an example.
So you don't agree that the economy is sort of failing right now and the inflation is soaring?
No.
Inflation is soaring, isn't it?
No, but the thing is, we expect the growth in Venezuela is expected to be 4.4% from now to 2011. And when you take into account that we have gone through a very difficult crisis all over the world, I mean, Latin America, and particularly Venezuela, is doing quite well. If you go to see in the past, in the 80s, the economy of Venezuela grew no more than 2%.
Okay.
And if you see, for example, social spending is 17% of GDP. The relation between GDP and debt is 20%, and it was 80% in the past.
Well, let me ask you this then. You know, obviously it's a puzzle to many of us who watch, and including many of your own citizens. Why then, if the economy is as good as you're saying, and Venezuela is as oil-rich as it is, why are there these incredible rolling shortages of electricity, shortages of water? I mean, how does that square up then?
Well, let me tell you, there was a recent report by a journalist, a Mexican journalist from La Jornada, who went to Venezuela last week, and he reported that there has been some cuts of energy in Caracas for 2 hours. And when he said what is happening in other countries in the region, including Mexico City, he said, I don't understand why are we presenting the situation of like almost a collapse of the energy in Venezuela. This is not the case. We are facing important problems. We have not had rain. We invested basically in hydroelectricity. 75% of electricity comes from hydro, and we need to adjust that. So we are facing a challenge, but not the kind of collapse or crisis that has been presented.
So the problem, though, is that not many Venezuelans are convinced by the whole environmental problem, as you call it, the shortages of water. They see, according to the polls anyway, that there is a sort of a lack of infrastructure, a lack of investment, and again, there are many complaints by Venezuelan citizens on basic attacks on basic freedoms, for instance, freedom to speak and freedom of the press. RCTV, the independent media, has been yanked from the cable system. Before that, it was yanked from regular television, and people are not happy about that. Why is that happening?
Well, the thing is, you mentioned, it's like, for example, with corruption. What happened is it's a paradox. With that if the court of Venezuela charge somebody who is perceived or seen as close as to the government, is a purge. And if the court charge somebody who is perceived or seen as close to the opposition, is a cracking down. It's like, you know, the expression of them if you do, them if you don't.
Another question about the Cubanization of Venezuelan politics, let's say. Again, many Venezuelans are worried about the number and the prominence of Cuban advisors, whether it's in the police, the army, in healthcare, the intelligence service from Cuba. Why is that necessary in Venezuela today?
Well, look, Christiane, and I would like, you know, I think you should go there and see with your own eyes, because obviously the report that you are getting is only one side of the story. What we have in a lot of Cubans in Venezuela is in the medical sector. We have more than 20,000 doctors in Venezuela working in poor neighborhoods. And even in the past presidential election, the candidate from the opposition, he said that he was going to keep the doctors because those doctors are loved by the population. This is a number of Cubans that we have there. We have long cooperation, a very large cooperation with Cuba in many areas: sport, medicine, in sugar cane, in many other areas. And people only concentrate in people that might be helping us in other areas. But the important participation of Cubans in Venezuela is in the medical sector.
Okay, well, we can follow that up a little later in all the other sectors as well. But where do you see the president leading the country over some of these very difficult challenges over the next year or so?
We had a major challenge with the financial system, because last year there was a lot of private bankers that went out of the compensation, and we have to intervene. We have been able to solve that problem. 95% of the accounts or saving accounts or current accounts holders, they have guaranteed their money. We have recuperated all those banks and they're working normally. So we have gone through this process of the financial situation. Regarding energy, we are going to invest more than $1 billion this year, and we are incorporate 4,000 megawatts. Okay. And we have a lesson that we have learned, and the lesson is that we have to become less dependent of hydroelectricity. We are having a lot of help from Brazil. They had the same problem 2 years ago, and they are helping us minimizing consumption to get through this crisis. And then we are preparing ourselves for the elections, in the parliamentary elections in September, in a normal situation.
And everybody will be paying close attention. Ambassador Alvarez, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Washington today.
Thank you, Christiane. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And next, can President Chavez deflect blame for his country's economic troubles? That's when we return.